said with some sincerity. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Planning Committee for the month of July. I have a few things to read first, which I must do before we start, and I must check that we're online. Are we online? Yep, good. Welcome to today's meeting. This is a public meeting, and members of the public and press are permitted to report on the proceedings. Reporting includes filming, photographing, making an audio recording and providing commentary on proceedings. Please note that this meeting is recorded and streamed live. These recordings are published in the relevant meeting pages of the Council website. By choosing to attend this public meeting, you are deemed to have given your consent to being filmed or recorded, or for any footage to be broadcast or published. If the alarm sounds, the premises must be evacuated immediately. Do not spend time collecting personal things, or belongings, should I say. All emergency escape routes are clearly signed. Once you've left the building, the assembly point is in the High Street, opposite the Guildhall. Members and other speakers are reminded to use their microphone when speaking. Quite a few people here today, and I know there's one or two new members of staff, so just to orientate everyone to the committee, my name's Chris Mitchell, I'm the chairman. On the left, the right and at the end, we have the members of the committee. To my right, I have our legal advisor, Georgina, and head of planning on my left, Andrew Thompson. And then we have officers sat to the rear and to the right. And then the person who runs it all sat behind the computers over there, who shouts at me if I get things wrong. That's if George hasn't kicked me first. But if we start then, are there any appointments for substitutes?
Yes, Chair. We have Councillor Mrs Lucy Hodgson for Councillor Roberts and Councillor Denham for Councillor De Serra. And we also have apologies from Councillor Alcott. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any declarations of interest? Yes, Marjorie.
I had an exchange with one of the people who have come to speak about the harvester application via email. But I don't think I've expressed an opinion, and certainly not in public. So I think I'm still okay to.
Thank you, Marjorie. In which case we move on to...
Mr Chairman.
Sorry,
Mr Chairman. I think I'm in the same position. I've had emails from one of the objectors, but I haven't got engaged with the case. I've just acknowledged the emails.
Thank you, Alan. Agenda item 3 then, which is the minutes of the previous planning committee, which I won't be signing as I was away at the time. So Councillor Agar, who kindly stepped in as the chair, as the deputy chair, I will ask you if you could sign those for me, please. So are there any comments on page 1? On page 2? On page 3? Page 4? Page 5 or page 6? No one's raising any comments, in which case we'll accept those as a true record of that meeting. And if I just pass that round to Pat, so you can sign them. Thank you, Pat. Minutes of the previous conservation panel meeting. I don't have those minutes in front of me, I'm afraid, but that's not a problem because I've got them online. Any questions on, thank you, on page 1, on page 2, page 3 or 4? Excellent, so we accept those as a record of that. Thank you, George. Moving on then to agenda item 5, site visits. There are no site visits planned for today. However, members were asked if they wanted to wander or take a walk around the proximity of the site in Foregate Street, then they're perfectly at liberty to do. I think it's a site we all know well anyway, and the same for the one on the Droitwich Road. So, Margaret, agenda item 6, any public participation?
There's no public participation, Chair.
But we do have public representation at agenda item 7. And that is, I apologise if it's Mrs, but Miss or Mrs Julia Kimberley and Sarah Jones. The way it works, obviously, please come and take a seat in front of the mics at the top there. You'll hear the presentation on the application. You will then get an opportunity to make your points. You get 5 minutes, and that's 5 minutes between you Let me just make sure that's right. Yep, that's 5 minutes between you, not 5 minutes each, I'm afraid. And Georgina on my right will raise her hand at about 4.5 minutes to let you know that you've got 30 seconds to wrap up. Miss Kimberlyn Jones, if you'd like to come to the table, please do. Thank you. Oh. Okay, cool. Owen, thanks, buddy. So we are jumping to agenda item 10 to be dealt with first, in order that our speakers aren't delayed any longer than they need to be. So, Alan, Andrew, all over to you.
Thank you, Chair. This is the application 22-00159 /FUL, which is relating to Purdeswell House on Droitwich Road. It's for the demolition of Purdeswell Harvester Restaurant and the redevelopment for a 78-bed care home with amenity gardens, boundary treatment, car parking, revised access from Droitwich Road, and servicing arrangements. So the application site is outlined in red. You can see there the old Harvester Restaurant with its children's play area and skittle alley, and the car park is to the south. Below that you can see Checkett's Court, and obviously you can see there Checkett's Lane running alongside that, and opposite Checkett's Lane is the entrance to Purdeswell Park, which used to be the entrance to Purdeswell House. In terms of the existing site plan, you will note that there is, as I say, existing buildings on the site. There has been a recent fire, but that is not a material consideration in there, but the buildings, as in terms of the structure, is still substantively still there. We haven't been in since the fire, to see what's left in terms of internally, but we'll come to that in a minute. What you can see on the site plan there are a number of trees in the car parking area that will be removed as part of the demolition, but a vast majority of the trees around the outside will be retained, and we'll come to the site plan in a moment. The existing elevations, again, it's an existing building that's been extended a number of times over the years, and as such, most of the historical internal aspects, there isn't an awful lot left of the actual history internally. This is before, as I say, these are photos taken before the fire, but there you can see the existing access and Checkett's Court, and some of the existing trees on outside the application site. And again, there you can see the building that looks up Droitwich Road to the existing building. And again, the existing building just to the right of the tree will be where the new access, if approved, would go in. The existing pine tree is to be retained, and you can also see the sweet chestnut tree there in the background, which would also be retained. This is the proposed site plan, and this is, you've also just received a copy of this, so this is a crop version of this. This is also showing a number of trees. So this is this proposed site plan without the plan that you've got in front of you now as well in the late paper. But this doesn't show the. This just shows, again, the retention of the existing tree, sweet chestnut tree, the proposed new access, the new building, and obviously car parking and access arrangements. This shows the ground floor layout. Again, light blue is the communal areas, brown is staffing or plant areas, and green are bedrooms. There are 22 on the ground floor, and then 28 on both the upper floors of the first and second floor. Again, as I say, similar kind of areas in terms of similar colours, brown for staffing, blue for communal, and green for the bedrooms. These is within the roofscape, though there is also all the plant and staff rooms are also accommodated. So there will be no external plant or machinery as part of the proposal. So this is entirely bound. This is within the roofscape. So these are the proposed elevations, and what you can see here are the proposed north elevation within the courtyard, showing a section through the plan on the top, and again another elevation through the courtyard to the south. And again, two more elevations, again showing the entrance on the bottom, and again a section through the actual building as well. In terms of which also shows some 3D plans, just again, the sweet chestnut tree, which is being retained, is an important feature for the architects and part of the scheme. So it is being, as I say, being retained and carefully designed around. You should note, obviously, the tree officer has no objections subject to tree protection measures in relation to the application submission. Furthermore, again, some more street views, and again a view from the other side looking at the private gardens, which will be landscaped. And again, some of the communal areas where people will be able to sit out and or sit together with other residents. And this is the proposed landscaping plan. Again, you can see along the bottom, you can see boundary treatments and seats, which will go within the raised beds of the communal garden. And again, how the planting will be, there'll be several new planting trees along the northern boundary in particular, but also alongside Droitwich Road and also along the southern boundary to Checkett's Court. That's it in terms of the presentation. As I say, the application is recommended for approval. In terms of the heritage and those aspects, obviously that is covered in detail in the report, and I've got nothing further to add to that. We have received some late papers with regard to the objections, which are resubmission of the objections that were received from Mrs. Kimberley and Dr. Nixon, as well as a late response from Councillor Alcott in respect of the application proposals. We have considered, as I say, the majority of these issues within the actual report, so there's nothing new being raised there, and it doesn't change the recommendation being proposed. As such, the application is recommended for approval, subject to a section 106 and the conditions as set out at section 9.
Andrew, thank you very much. At this point, you get an opportunity to speak. You'll get your 5 minutes, and at the end of that, any members of the committee who have follow-on questions for you will be able to ask you questions which will give you a chance to clarify or make further comment on that relates to the question. If in front of you, you've got a microphone on the right-hand side. There's a little button. When you press it, it goes red, like mine is. I'll turn mine off, and then that will give you you'll be heard clearly, and obviously by the audio on television as well. So George has got a timeline on. The floor is yours.
Oh, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I might just introduce myself and tell you that smart sort of presentations aren't my forte, but I do think I'm very well qualified to speak at this meeting on various counts. One, I am born and bred in Worcester. I was born in the Tithing, just down the road from this planning application. And in 1946, I moved into my grandmother's home in Droitwich Road, just down the road from this site. I also went to the City of Worcester Girls' Grammar School, which used to be in what is now St Francis Court, a retirement home. And I also moved back to Worcester with my young family in 1972 and have lived in my house, which is only 5 minutes away from this house, for over 50 years. In addition to that, I'm coming up for my 83rd birthday. I've been eligible for a bus pass now for nearly 23 years, so I'm of the age group that I think we're talking about in retirement home. So having said all that, I hope that you've been able to read my, I won't bore you with going through my my reams of writing here, but I would like to point out on the paper number 5, which Margaret Johnson kindly printed for you all, the omission of pound signs all the way through is because at the time I wrote this I had an American keyboard. But I would just like to say that I believe this site does not belong at the moment to the applicant. It still belongs to, I believe, MacDonald. I checked on the land registry, and therefore it's still possibly available. And it is an ideal site for social housing. Why have you got a new primary school across the road? Why have you got a new low-cost supermarket, which young families without cars or having to drive their kids to school won't need to have? Now, another matter which has not arisen in all of this is a bat survey. I haven't been able to see a bat survey anywhere. Now, I believe bat surveys are pretty compulsory, and I believe that Worcester City Council spent 18 months conducting a bat survey at the end of Claines Lane, just up the road, before the football club was allowed to use that. Now, I have an acquaintance who lives in a flat just behind this site, who for the last 2 years has been avidly at sunset watching the bats, and there are a lot of bats around there. So, and at this time of year, there's something called a maternal bat roosts, and has any investigation been done to see whether any bats are breeding in this area at the moment? So that's one thing. I have seen no mention of asbestos at all in any pollution reports in this. For a while, I assisted my son in renovating some distressed houses in Worcester, and a lot of them were built round about the time that the extension was put on the harvester with a children's play area and everything. And at that time, it was extremely popular to use ceiling tiles, which a lot of people don't know had asbestos in them, also floor tiles. Has this been explored? So if this is demolished, we could be looking at hidden asbestos in this building. Has anyone considered that, please? So I'm here, I think, today to say there's an oversupply of high quality care homes in this area. The Belmont across the road, which opened in February, February the 9th this year, has up till now, up to a fortnight ago, only 14 residents out of a possible 75 to 80. And of those residents, one comes from Chatley Corbett, one comes from Wychbold, one comes from Morven, and one comes from Droitwich, I think. But last but not least, one of the residents comes from London. Now, please don't tell me that you are addressing the needs of the housing for the elderly in this area, because there are no elderly from this area in Belmont at the moment. I visited Fernal House, and they're under-occupied at the moment.
I'm afraid you've only got 5 seconds left.
Right.
Time's up.
And they are very disturbed by this planning application. I would also say, why is this before you, before the fires has been fully investigated by the fire brigade and the police? Thank you.
Ms Kimberley, thank you very much. I'm going to ask officers, there were 2 specific questions there. One reference the bat survey and asbestos. If you can give your, I mean, I'm sure it's in the report, but yeah, if you just want to give the detailed response rather than going trawling through the report.
Yeah, no problem. So yes, there has been a bat survey. There is a preliminary ecological survey which covers bats, birds and all protected species, and that has found that there are bats in the area, but there is no no issue with the demolition as part of that, and that recommendations are available as part of the public documentation. So there is an ecological survey. In relation to asbestos, that's dealt with under the Health and Safety Executive and building regulations and those aspects. So we wouldn't consider asbestos. And again, those are matters that would need specific licences to be removed and be dealt with appropriately.
Thank you. In terms of I just want to clarify a point, because sometimes people raise a point and it may not be addressed in the meeting. In terms of housing provision for care homes, we work to the South Worcestershire Development Plan. Just so happens we have one of the chairs of that committee sat in the room as part of PED committee. So therefore, as part of our South Worcestershire Development Plan, we have a commitment and a legal obligation to provide housing over a period of time. When that housing built within that period, it's a different matter. So some of the development that's going on now will be in order to meet a provision in years down the line. So just in terms of a clarification on that. But I'll now open it up to members who may have questions for Ms Kimberley. So thank you very much for taking your time. I don't think there's any clarifications required. We now go to the applicant, represented by Ms Sarah Jones. Thank you. Again, you have 5 minutes and at 4 minutes 30 seconds, not 4 minutes 55. You'll get away. Thanks so much.
Good afternoon, Chairman and committee members. My name is Sarah Jones of Claremont Planning, and I represent Mac Group and Bordeaux Estates with respect to their proposals at Purdeswell House. The site, as we know, comprises the former Harvester restaurant. This closed in April 2019. The redevelopment of this site will provide a new care home facility to address a recognised local need and contribute towards older persons housing in Worcester. The proposals will assist in meeting both current and future need and will address the changing demographics of an older population. The proposals will help meet a need identified within the Strategic Housing Market Assessment that establishes within Worcester City between 2016 and 2030, the number of people aged 65 or over will increase by 29.3%, whilst the number of people aged over 85 will increase by 47.8%. It also identifies a need for 864 additional units of older persons accommodation up to 2030. The applicants provide not only regular care and nursing assistance, they also provide respite care and specialist dementia care, meeting a variety of needs for their residents. The 78-bed care home will provide a revised vehicle access arrangement from Droitwich Road, whilst ensuring sufficient car parking in accordance with Highway Authority standards. The car parking arrangement includes electric vehicle charging points that exceed the County Council's requirements. Scheme proposals have evolved following pre-application discussions, and the applicants have worked with your officers to ensure that the layout is acceptable. The proposals, in our view, will provide a high-quality environment for residents while respecting the local context. In respect of landscaping, the proposals include new tree and hedge planting, as well as the retention of the mature sweet chestnut tree that Andrew suggested earlier, and the Council's tree officer has no objections to the proposals. In respect of heritage, the site is not within a conservation area, the existing buildings are not listed, and the site is not locally listed. The Council's Heritage Officer agrees that the findings of our heritage statement confirm that the site would have no impact on heritage assets, whilst underground archaeology will be investigated during construction. Safeguarding conditions are proposed, and they require a programme of archaeological excavation works to be undertaken in line with a written scheme of investigation that the applicants are of course happy to comply with. The Council officers have confirmed that Purdeswell House is of limited significance and falls short of the criteria for listing, and the robust and detailed justification for the redevelopment of the site that's been put forward by the applicant justifies the demolition of all existing buildings and loss of a restaurant. The application offers key benefits, including a contribution towards housing need, specifically older persons accommodation, the redevelopment of a brownfield site in a sustainable location, and economic benefits arising from 40 full-time equivalent jobs being created on site. The applicants have worked with officers of your council to provide a high-quality development, and it's respectfully requested that members support the officer's recommendation and approve the application. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Jones. Again, I open the floor to members if anyone has any questions for the applicant. I've got Councillor Hodgson and then I've got Councillor Lewin.
Whilst you say that the heritage side, you are going to pull down those buildings, have you considered perhaps in the design of the building, of the build, reflecting that heritage in the actually in the build, so that something can be held for the future or something like that?
Thank you. When the application proposals were evolving, our architects did look at initially retaining the building and seeing if that would work. Unfortunately, we're under quite a lot of restrictions in terms of building regulations, and in particular sizes of rooms to accommodate care home requirements these days. And unfortunately, they just couldn't get it to work. And in terms of reflecting things in the new design, it is a modern development. We have no problem in saying that, but we feel that the harvester that was there before had been extended numerous times and had really lost a lot of its heritage importance. And we did commission a heritage statement to be undertaken, and they looked at the history of the site. And again, we spoke to the heritage officer, and they were happy with our justification that indeed that this type of scheme was okay.
Thank you. I've got Karen.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to understand, please, a little bit more about the type of residents you're expecting in this building. As in, are you expecting people who are going to be confined to their rooms? Whether you expect them to be able to get into town, get to local services? Whether you expect people to have mobility scooters? Perhaps in the future, electric trikes to get around? And if you've got 40 full-time equivalent jobs, I'd like to know why you're only providing 6 cycle racks. Thank you.
Thank you. So in terms of parking and cycling, it's not envisaged that our residents will actually have cars. We find that once people move into these units, that generally, initially they might have a car for a few months, but then that generally moves away. So the car parking is for staff and visitors, and we also have a space for a minibus, stroke ambulance, that type of thing. We've provided some electrical vehicle charging points, and the standards for cycle parking have been met in accordance with the Highway Authority standards, and there's no objection from Highways on cycle parking spaces. The type of people that we envisage coming here are quite a broad range, but we do provide a lot of care as people change they get older and have more needs. So we do have dementia care and 24-hour nursing care. So there will be obviously the ability for people to leave. They're not prisoners. They are able to walk into town if they're mobile. There are bus services, and indeed there might well be the need for mobility scooters we wouldn't stop anything like that.
Yeah, so at the moment in your application, I can't see where mobility scooters would be stored. Is that not shown, but they are included, the areas?
I don't think they are shown, and that's something we can look at if required.
And I think you need to, when you say that you've met the requirement for cycle parking, I met a resident today who is at the moment uses a mobility scooter, and there's a lady who's quite well known in Worcester who uses an electric trike to get around because she's a disabled person, and he's using it and he's going to change because he says, actually, I can use an electric trike and get around, have a little bit of exercise, and actually feel like I've still got my control of going out and I'm not confined to my house. And I think it's quite, I'm a little bit disappointed that you haven't got more of a vision for your residents, and that you think that with 40 full-time jobs and that number of residents, that you're only putting space for 3 Sheffield stands, I presume. I just think it's really short-sighted, and I'm just wondering whether you could review that, please.
We have absolutely no problem with reviewing that if that is a requirement from officers. As I say, we have met the Highway Authority standards, but adding some more cycle spacing wouldn't be an issue with us.
Hello. Just following on from Councillor Hodgson's point about, I understand that retention of the building is not feasible, but I know this building quite well because I jog past it all the time, and I would be really, really sad to see this building go because it's beautiful. Has there been any consideration to retaining at least the front facade of the building, which is the attractive bit that you see from the road, or is this a no-no?
It's not a no-no, it's just not what the architects have designed for this scheme to meet modern standards, so it's not something that's before the authority to consider.
I understand that. My grandmother is in a care home and it's monstrous. It looks ugly and it looks depressing, and something like the retention of the facade would make me feel a bit more comfortable with this, rather than just putting somebody somewhere that is, I don't know how to describe it. They're just dull and they look ugly, and no disrespect to whoever's designed these pictures, but when I see these care homes, they look ugly and they don't look like they've got any imagination. And something to liven it up and at least make it look a little bit more appealing, I think would be a good idea.
Thank you. I understand your comments and I appreciate them. Really, we've got a modern scheme here, though, and we're not retaining the facade in this situation.
I've got Pat.
Thank you, Chair. I have a couple of issues around this one that I'd like to bounce off you, if that's all right. Firstly, I have some agreement here with Owen, because it feels a bit like a barracks for warehousing people who are older or vulnerable. And that's reinforced by the fact there's a very tiny garden area and a lot of car parking. And it seems to me that the priority isn't the residents. And that bothers me quite a lot. I do think, I mean, we know that green space is crucial to well-being. All the more crucial with vulnerable residents, I would have thought. I don't think there's enough of it. There are a few trees around the outside. They won't be getting to those, I don't suppose, because they're not going to be able to go that far, most people. But it would be nice to feel there was a decent-sized garden area, more than you've got now, with the ability to get around in it, you know, that's actually user-friendly for people who are less than able. So that's one question. May I just...
Certainly. So our client is very aware of the importance of gardening and green space and outdoor space for residents. They've designed the building so that there are some two TPO trees on site, and they're making sure that they've positioned the building away from those to ensure their longevity. They are retaining and improving what's there already on site, and they do appreciate, you know, the needs of residents in that respect.
Thank you. I really don't think that's reflected in the design, I have to say. I don't think that garden space is anything like adequate for the needs of about 50 people, isn't it? 22 on the ground floor, 28 on the next floor. I do think they need more garden space if I'm to feel the design is adequate. And the other thing is, the heritage statement, I don't know. I'm a bit bothered about that. This isn't a listed asset, I appreciate. And I appreciate that it's not treated in the same way as listed assets would be. And it's not even locally listed, but it does have value. And our officers have said, our conservation officer has said that there are a number of things that would be suitable for architectural salvage. And if it's suitable for architectural salvage, why aren't we leaving it there? Is a bit of a worry.
I guess that's probably a question for our conservation officer as opposed to the applicant, but yeah. Pat, was that a question or was it a statement?
A question to both, possibly, yes.
Again, we've worked quite hard with the council's conservation officer. We have employed a heritage consultant. They've looked at the history. They've looked at whether the building should be listed. The heritage officer agreed that it didn't warrant it. And we feel that we have met the requirements and consulted appropriately, and that indeed this building has been found by your own officers not to be worthy of listing. So I think that's all I can really add to that.
Thank you. And I've now got Alan.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Jones, I wasn't actually going to ask you any questions until you mentioned parking. Obviously on and I may invite Ms. Hanshaw to comment at the appropriate time later on. Stop muttering, Karen. But you've got 33 parking bays, and the phrase that bothered me in your submission was they're mainly for the staff. So can you just tell me what your concept is? I mean, this is a care home, not a place where people go to die. And if they can't have cars, and I don't frankly envisage many 80 or 90-year-olds whizzing on their bikes into Worcester, but therefore, if they want to go out and about, which we should be encouraging, then all they're left with is an unreliable bus service. So it bothers me. So you see, are you working on the principle that most people are going to be of an age where they don't drive, or you're going to try and encourage them not to drive when we should be encouraging them to get out and about and see their family and friends? We don't want them to stay indoors, do we? It raises the question about, garden facilities and so on. So could you just enlighten me? In other words, how many car parking spaces have you provided for residents who will have a car and want to drive? I mean, if you think elderly people don't drive, go down to Dorset, and where you'll find the average speed is 15 miles an hour. Everybody's in brand new cars because they've got lots of money, but they're getting on a bit, so you just see the little top of a head above a steering wheel. And because elderly people do drive, and I applaud that. They've got a life to lead. It's not the end of their life going into a care home, it's beginning with something else. So can you just enlighten me on your raison d'etre?
Absolutely, and we don't see that it's the end of life for people either. This is just purely on experience from the care sector, the way that our operator works sites. It is a fact that they find that we're not stopping people bring cars, and generally people often come with cars initially, and we wouldn't stop that. But we find that the car usage deteriorates the longer people are there, and so the car parking spaces that we're providing are majority for visitors and staff, and that's based on models of care home operators throughout the country. That's what we find happens. It's not we're stopping people. Absolutely encourage people to keep active, mobile, but that is just the nature of these types of proposals. And just one other thing I'd add is that we did have quite a lot of support from some members of the public in terms of the previous use that was a McDonald's there, and the huge amounts of cars going to and from the site. and the fact that this type of use was seen as a betterment in terms of traffic on the roads.
Very briefly, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, thank you. That's helpful, but you can't expect a McDonald's drive-through not to have cars going through. So how many specifically then cars parking spaces are for residents? Because what is the age group you're going to market? I quite understand as people get older, fewer are going to have cars. I accept that. So, but what age group are you marketing? Because I know many people in their 80s who are they're drivers. I mean, they may not be the best drivers, but they're drivers nonetheless. So could you just be a bit more specific, please, on that?
Oops. The age range is from 65 plus. It is young, I agree. And I don't believe that we've actually specifically pinpointed visitor spaces, staff spaces and spaces for residents. But overall, we're providing 33, and that is based on how other care homes operate and our clients' other sites and how they see that it's needed. So,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will invite Ms. Hanchett later to comment on what's just been said.
Thank you. I've now got Jenny Barnes, then I've got Lynn, and then I've got Marjorie. You're getting the whole round today.
Thank you, Chair. My question's about affordability, because we have quite strict criteria in Worcester about a percentage of affordable accommodation. Could you, in the first instance, tell me how much of this accommodation will be affordable?
So I don't have the figures in front of me, but MAC Homes work with the NHS CCG, and they're in discussions with the CCG and they're supportive of these schemes, and there is a percentage, I understand, that come via NHS referrals, and there are also open market properties, but I couldn't tell you the exact amount. I do apologise, I haven't got those figures in front of me.
Thank you. So that's you don't know. Okay. So it could be 1%, or one property could be affordable and the rest not. Which takes me on to really 78 people of various states of ability in this premises. I'm concerned about the car park like several others. I'm also worried about the bus service, which is inadequate and you have to cross a major road to get into town. How are you going to be supporting your residents to be as able as they can be if they are closed in quite a small space without very many gardens? It just feels really cramped. And I worry that there will be no escape.
Well, we have 24-hour carers on site, and they look after the needs of all our residents. If they wish to go out, they can be accompanied by the carers. And that there are we're quite keen on providing communal areas so people aren't feeling isolated and lonely. So we have lounges, we have a TV sort of cinema room, hairdressers. So there are on-site facilities as well, and we make sure that that people aren't, as you are picturing, just being stuck in a room on their own. You know, we are very keen on making sure that these people are looked after incredibly well. The owner of MAC, who is the applicant, is a doctor himself. He works in this sector, so he's very alive to the needs and wants of elderly people. So it's not just some big bad developer coming along, building small rooms and moving off site and doing the next one. That's not the model here at all.
I've now got Lynn, and then we have Marjorie.
Thank you, and I think you kind of moved towards the question I was going to ask. You sort of alluded to the effect that the applicant is experienced in this sector. I wonder if you could give us a bit more information about that, to kind of, to back up, the level of knowledge or experience in this sector. And then also, I don't know if it's an allowable question. It's been said that, so you're working for the applicant, but they don't yet own the land or the site. So is there...
If I can just intercede, Lynn, the first question is bordering well on the edge of being allowable. That is not a material consideration, I'm afraid. But reference the ownership of the land, you don't have to own the land to apply for an application on it, if that's of help. I can see where you're coming from, but we're getting quite close to personal stuff now, which is not really relevant. And I look to my legal advisor to make sure, yeah, I am about right, aren't I?
Well, yeah, because actually applicant should, in many respects, it's different if you've got a management agreement that you're looking at, but this planning permission will run with the land, so you don't really look at the personal details of the applicant.
Sorry, Lynn, but do you have any other questions? No, thank you. And Marjorie, last but definitely not least.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask a question about the number of mature trees which will be retained. I've seen twice that many trees will be retained, but I'd actually like to know what the numbers are, because I feel that maybe it's been, okay, let's build this. Oh dear, we've lost that many trees, rather than thinking about how we can build something that actually saves as many trees as possible.
Okay. I haven't got the figures in front of me, I do apologise, but I do want to state that there are 2 TPO trees on site, and we want to make sure that those trees are looked after, they have longevity, and the way that the design has been developed is to ensure that the buildings are moved away from those, that the root protection areas are saved, that during construction there's conditions to ensure that the trees are protected. We are making sure that all the boundary trees are provided. There will be a need for some to be removed, but we've done a tree survey and we are protecting those that are category A and the most important, and we've developed that in accordance with discussions with the tree officer, and they don't have any objections to the scheme proposals.
Thank you. Officers may be able to help you on the exact number. I'm scrolling through. 14 seems to be the number that jumps out of my mind, but I might have got that wrong, Marjorie. Unless there are any further questions, I'd like to thank both the objector and the applicant for taking the time out to come and present to the committee. It's always an unusual place to be, and many people will never come before a planning committee. And the questions you get asked, in some cases, are quite difficult to answer. But we appreciate you taking the time to come and spend the time with us. And I think we've all learned a little bit from both parties by listening to you. So thank you very much. If I could ask you now, if you just take your seat back at the room, or if you want to leave, up to you. Thank you very much. Before we open debate, there are a couple of clear questions I think that came out, which might help clarify members if I just get officers to answer those straight away. And I think 3 or 4 of the big ones that came out is highways. I'm going to start with you first, because I always do. can you just clarify the parking conditions, whether the applicant meets them or not? We can debate whether they're good enough or not separately, but whether they meet the highway standards. That would be the first one. The second one then, I think, is going to be on the trees. Can we just clarify about tree preservation order, what trees are being retained and what aren't? And I think more importantly, what are we going to do to ensure that a developer doesn't get in on site, knock down 5 trees that have a TPO and then go, I'm really sorry. I think that's where you were going from, Marjorie, wasn't it? And heritage. We're going to ask from the heritage perspective, just to get a little bit more meat to the bones of why we've got to the decision that we have in terms of not an on-spot heritage designation, and I think a little bit more clarification. And I know we spoke earlier on, Doctor, prior to this, about what putting heritage assets into restoration facilities means, as opposed to a scrapyard, I think. But so I do those in order. So I'm going to start with highways, and then that might help the debate, I think.
Thank you, Chairman. As you've already heard from the representative of the applicant, the parking provision is in conformity with our standards. It's also, as you've already heard, it's similar to, and it's based on similar facilities of, of this type. So now we do see a large proportion of the staff that work on these developments accessing them via public transport rather than actually driving to the site. There has been some conversation, I believe it was yourself, Councillor Amos, about how many of the 33 parking spaces are being set aside for residents and how many are for staff and visitors. The applicant hasn't proposed that within their assessment. They have just proposed the total number of parking spaces. And as I've said, that is in conformity. It's very similar to what we see elsewhere. Also, reference was made by the local objector to the facility opposite the Belmont. That is a similar number of bedrooms and has less parking. Now, I visit that site, I pass that site several times a day. I've never seen the car parking at or near capacity, although I do note that the objector said that the actual care home is nowhere near capacity at the moment, so that might have a bearing on that. So I hope that helps. But I'd also like to very quickly add a point from Councillor Lewing that she made about parking spaces for mobility scooters and electric trikes. And I'll hold my hands up here. We don't currently have a standard within our guides for mobility scooter parking or trikes, but I think it's a very good point, particularly for developments like this, and I'll ensure that going forward that we'll do some research to find out what is an appropriate level, and we'll ensure that that is put in within our standards going forward, because it's something that I believe we have missed out. So thank you for bringing that up.
Obviously an oversight from the former cabinet member for highways, and something he can learn while he's here.
The existing one can change it.
I do have another question, actually, which I'd like officers to answer. I thank the Deputy Chair for bringing it to my attention, Pat. If we could just clarify the affordable housing question and how that works with care homes as well. So the next one was, over to you.
Thank you.
Trees.
Trees. So there are 9 proposed on-site that are due to be lost. One additional one would be lost probably as part of the new access arrangements, but that's on highway land. So that in effect there are 9 to be lost, but then also there are new tree planting to be proposed, as you saw on the landscaping proposals. None of the TPO trees are to be lost. All the trees that are to be lost are of low value in terms of their long-term health. So they wouldn't, they're called category C in effect, so they would have moderate to low limited life left. That's just the way they've grown, or some of them are in the car park and have limited root protection zones or things on those kind of lines. In terms of affordable housing, there is no standard for affordable housing within policy for care homes. The arrangements that were being talked about is between NHS, same with doctors taking on private patients and NHS patients. So that's outside the remit of our affordable housing policy. Heritage, I will point out, obviously, in terms of the report, and that we are proposing condition 4 which includes the reuse and recording of assets. Now, in terms of what's left in terms of the building, I haven't been in since the fire, mainly because I need new hard hats and steel hats, and I'm not sure whether or not it's safe or not. But the only asset of any kind of significance in the heritage report was a fireplace. But the rest of it we are using condition 4 to look at whether or not we can reuse materials, some kind of semblance of recording. Those may be in artwork or things on those kind of lines. Again, at this stage we don't know, so to speak, but that is a condition of the approval prior to demolition.
Paul, do you want to add anything to that?
Not really, Chairman. I mean, Mr Thompson's absolutely correct. There is condition 4. There are several stages to it. We require a draft strategy for the recording of features of interest, so we will require them to submit a proposal for how they propose to record them and the level at which they propose to record them. So it's not just leaving it up to the applicants to do it. We will have an intervention before the recording is done. And that strategy will also include identifying features for reuse or recovery in the new development. We heard earlier from the agent that they might be open to an element of that. There's been some contention in some of the comments that people have made prior to the meeting today. We even heard the term of scrapyard used. These are architectural salvage places, and I said to you, Chairman, before the meeting started, that many of the restoration projects that I look after within the city could not happen if it was not possible to find bricks, chimney pots and other architectural features salvaged from just such demolitions. And yes, it's less than retaining the entire building, but it does mean that the value of these things for what they're intended to be used for, the embodied energy contained within them and everything, is actually saved. And it's a lot nearer than just simply saying it just all gets demolished. There's no record made of it. And I stand by what it says in condition 4.
So just to finish off the parking debate, there are in a number of brown areas, there are a number of stores, so those could be repurchased as buggy stores or things on those kind of lines. So there are a number of storage areas on each floor that could be used as buggy or mobility scooter stores without them having to be within the room.
I thank officers for those clarifications, which I hope will help the debate, and I now open the full debate to the committee. So questions from anyone. I've got Councillor Amos first.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Chairman. Given that it's a care home for 78 residents, what discussions have we had with the health authorities? Because it's part of an ongoing problem. We know the hospital and GP surgeries can't cope with current demand. Obviously, another 78 patients, elderly, with particular health needs, specific and complicated health needs possibly. So what discussions have we had with them? Because are we just overloading a system which is already at breaking point?
I probably will defer to officers. However, I don't believe that falls within the scope of planning officers, but I'll turn to them.
Yeah, they have been consulted. We've had no response from them. Again, they're focused more on new housing development as to needs. Again, I would be using my experience from other kind of places that generally when care homes go up, they bring in the doctors and nurses from other areas, but it also frees up hospital beds from the hospitals themselves. So the outpatients, and we can all anecdotally refer to COVID when a lot of outpatient beds were unavailable because they needed to get rid of outpatients who should have been perhaps in care facilities elsewhere. But that's again anecdotal in itself. So yeah, the short answer is they haven't responded to the application, Councillor.
Perhaps it's because they're too busy, Mr Chairman.
I've got Councillor Pat Agar.
Thank you, Chair. There are 2 or 3 observations I'd like to make about the design. Firstly, I do think the garden area is way too small. It needs to be at least a couple of times that size if we're to expect it to be of real value to that many residents. I mean, there's an awful lot of residents for a very tiny space. I think green space is absolutely vital, and I don't think the trees are going to be enough. We're talking about a an area of recreation and leisure that needs to be there outside, because we do know that quite a lot of these residents will not be going that far. So that, I think, is essential. And the other thing is, the electric charging points, it was rightly observed that it's something we need to look at, whether or not there is an area for mobility scooters, because there's a good chance that a number of residents will have those or want them. And if there isn't an area where they can be parked and somewhere where they can be charged, and whether or not they can get in and out of the lifts in them and that sort of thing, I think we need to know. And I do feel that that would be a positive in favour of this application. At the moment, it feels to me like a warehouse. It doesn't feel to me like a home. And I think it needs to feel like a home. And if I'd seen a different design, I would have been seriously happy to see another care home that is much needed.
Thank you, Beck. Did you want some clarification on the EV? Because from a mobility scooter, they tend to be charged through a 3-socket plug, as opposed to an EV charging point that we would relate to a car. But
Yeah.
did you? And I think, and again, Karen will clarify. We don't currently have any policy on them, although it would appear that the building has facilities that could be used to store these electric scooters, should they be used. But I think we've stumbled across a planning shortfall within our own policy that we probably need to plug. And that's done in PED. So Lucy will pick that up at the policy committee. But yeah, I think it's a fair point raised. Yeah.
Well, you'd need an adequate number of charging points on the ground floor somewhere.
Yeah, you would. Yeah. I've got Owen, I don't see Anna, then I've got Karen. Ever the gentleman. Karen, please.
Thank you, Chair. I would like some clarification, please, from the officer about the energy strategy for the building, because it all seems a little bit, well, we may do this, we might do that, and we'll look into that later. And I would have expected a bit more of a firm approach. It's the fact that they're talking about air conditioning, gas-fired boilers, a little bit of solar panels, but they can't do air source heat pumps throughout the building because they could only do the ground floor. It just all seems a bit woolly, and I would have expected a proper approach to come. So that's my first question, and I suppose it ties into the fact that we're losing so many trees, because of course the main thing for energy is not to have to use it, not for buildings to overheat, and actually trees are really important for keeping buildings cool. My second point is that the bus provision has actually gone down since this report was written. So there is no longer a bus that goes to Birmingham. It stops at Cat's Hill, and it isn't every 10 minutes, it's every 20 minutes. So the worry for me is that this is an ongoing trend, and that as buses keep on reducing, we're not going to see that many people, as many people as we do now, maybe using buses. And actually, to me, that does make the cycle parking even more important. And then my other question is really the design. I'm disappointed that the existing building has not been incorporated into the design. I think people have a familiarity with that building. People know where they are when they see it. They kind of, it's a particular place in Worcester where you know, oh, it's 200 metres to the roundabout, or I'm nearly outside, or, you know, it's somewhere that people recognise. And the architect describes this as an eye-catching building. And the problem for me is that they've made this kind of chubby pencil-like glazed thing, which isn't the entrance, but looks like it. And the entrance is round the side, and addresses the car parking rather than the road. And I just feel a bit uncomfortable with the design, and I wish that it had been a bit more sympathetic to what was there. And with the design drawings, I can't understand the relationship of the height of this building to the existing buildings next door because the elevation doesn't include the height of the buildings next door. And perhaps it would have been nice if there'd been some colour renders or some colour images so that we could actually, I think one of the problems that people think it looks like a warehouse is because it hasn't got colour and it hasn't got warmth. So perhaps, I don't know, could the officer have asked the architect to maybe produce a little bit more to help us warm to the scheme? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Yeah, I'm going to defer to Andrew because I haven't seen what colour it is, I must admit. I do know that it's a three-storey building similar to the one on, I want to say Chetwood Road. It's not Chetwood, it's Checketts Road, but I'll leave that to Andrew.
Thank you. So let's start with the carbon strategy. So the carbon, we have conditioned the policy requirements as part of condition 10. We have noted the elements in the design and access statement and in the planning statement that they will meet at least 10% renewable and low carbon energy. That is in accordance with our policy, policy 27. Obviously, building mix is changing this summer. My understanding is gas boilers are disappearing very, very fast. That's obviously dependent on whether or not there are any exemptions for care homes. I, again, haven't read building regulations that closely, or the new building regulations yet. In terms of EV charging points, you've also got condition 11 for at least 4. We'll be in discussions to have at least more if we can, because we recognise we're moving towards an EV world, so to speak. And obviously what we've also suggested is that that even if you don't install it now, that passive provision, so basically the wires are there for future, to allow future charging points to be installed, and there's no restrictions on that. In terms of buses, I know what you're saying. Those are comments provided by our highways officers, but what I will say is, as well as that, there is a Section 106 contribution towards your dial and ride kind of services for elderly and disabled residents. So that is a contribution that is sought by our highways colleagues, and we've agreed that with the applicant. That forms part of, again, that would be part of the permission going forward. And in terms of design, I understand what you're saying. I think, again, it's in terms of, there are colour images. I didn't want to use them. I used the images that they provided directly to us. There are images within the design access statement. It is a warm brick, similar to that on Checketts Court, probably a little bit brownier, rather than, it's a reddy, Checketts Court is very red at the moment. It's probably a little bit brown, more brown, and I think the windows are, again, are more contemporary. I think it's aluminium frames. So again, those are details that are within the design access statement, but we have put a materials condition on there, so we'll work on that to make it a bit warmer if we can, and work on those materials to ensure they are warm. But it doesn't, as I say, from the 3D imagery within the design access statement, which I haven't used, it does look a lot warmer, and I appreciate the harshness of black and white.
Sorry, so the elevation doesn't show the height of the building in comparison to the existing buildings, and that's what I'd like to know.
It's a similar height to those on Checketts Court. It's almost identical height in terms of that. Owen.
Thanks, Chair. Obviously, I've already made the point about the appearance and the facade, but just looking at this from a bird's eye view, the development just looks huge in relation to this site. It's almost as if as many rooms as possible have been crammed in. And if I was looking at this picture and rather than 3 wings, there were 2, it would seem to make sense that there was a lot more space for green area and parking. It just looks like too much is put on to this site to me. And I just wanted to make that observation.
Thank you, Owen. I've got Lucy, then I've got Marjorie.
Would you like to say a bit more about condition 4, about the heritage and what that might mean, if I'm allowed.
Well, it's a very stage process, basically. We require them to evaluate what there is on site that is worthy of recording a potential. So we will require them, and this is all the dischargeable conditions, so they can't get anywhere near the demolition until they've satisfied all of these things. They come back to us saying what they're proposing to record. We will then assess that and say, yes, this is fine, or actually, no, I think you're missing a point here. We would also like this additional information. They would then come back to us with a revised approach. We would then say, this is satisfactory. They would then go away and do it, come back with the findings to us. We would then evaluate the findings, and if we found those satisfactory, that would then discharge that part of the condition. And then the next stage in the condition would be during the demolition works, though anything that was identified to be retained or salvaged or sent on to a reclamation yard to make sure that that actually happened. And only when all of those things had happened would that condition be discharged.
And did you mention possibility of something like a public art or something like that to reflect the heritage in the building?
That is an option that is open to the applicants, the architect and the agent to come up with. It's not been specifically mentioned, no. But my remit was to comment upon the building as it presents itself today and a suggested remediation if the building was to be demolished.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's a real shame that the front of the building is likely to disappear altogether, and it's going to be replaced by this large, dominating, 3-storey solid frontage to the road. I know that's not a good enough reason for rejection. I'm concerned about the energy requirements of this building going forward, especially in view of the fact that gas bills are soaring at the moment. And I can well imagine that, you know, whatever the price of staying there for a week is at the beginning, is going to keep going up until it'll be out of reach of many people. And then finally, should there be another BAT survey in the conditions? On page 56, it says, in particular, note the need for further BAT full immersion surveys in proper season, but I couldn't see anything in the conditions about having a BAT survey, a further BAT survey when that time arises. And surely, when the old building is demolished, the BATs will have nowhere to go for a bit and it might not come back anyway.
I'm definitely looking to Andrew to respond to that one.
Councillor, I think I'd be happy to add an additional condition to put in the recommendations of the ecology survey. In effect, if that is, I think that's an omission on my part. Apologies.
I've got Lynn.
Thank you. And it's a question or a suggestion from the conversation so far. Can we add a condition about recognising the heritage and actually the social history of that building? I think one of the issues is, you know, the existing building is a landmark one and actually is much loved. You know, speaking for myself, there are generations of parents and families whose kids have played in the play barn and who've had meals in the restaurant, as well as, you know, the historical heritage aspects of the building. And I think it, you know, if it's technically not possible to retain the building, and I guess we kind of potentially have to accept that. We can only agree or disagree with the planning application that we have. We can amend it. I think, can we add a condition that there is, you know, an information board, that there is something that recognises what we are about to lose in that building.
I think I'm getting positive nods from Paul.
I think that's already in condition 4 in effect in kind of what we're expecting, but I can add in, for example, kind of that kind of further clarification, amend the wording if that's something that, again, the members want, again, including things like and historic and cultural interest would be one of those kind of aspects. So yes, we can.
Yeah. Yeah. Chairman, if I can just say also, I've heard someone say we've done it before. We did it at Battenhall Mount, and certain features of the blocks, that the school blocks that were knocked down, they have been retained and stored on site, and I've seen preliminary design for a feature that's going to incorporate those. So yes, there is precedent for it, it can be done.
I don't think I have anyone. Karen, another go.
Yes, sorry, Chair. I'm just thinking about conditions as well, and because I know that at the moment they only need to provide 10% energy, but because there is a lack of clarity in what they are doing, could we have them come back with a definite proposal that we can see? Because as a council, we are trying to get to net zero, and actually putting in gas boilers that probably are going to have to be taken out is extremely short-sighted and not in line with council policy.
But we're not, don't forget, we're dealing with planning policy here.
I know,
so,
but it's whether we could get some clarity and a firm proposal.
Yeah, so
So
have to come back with a plan.
That would be what the condition 10 says basically, is come back with the details of how you achieve at least 10%, not
That's not what I mean. It's very easy to put on solar panels on a building that is inefficient. So you can provide 10% for a building, but what I'm interested in is a building that doesn't put as much load of energy into the system. It's a lower energy building. So and at the moment they're talking about so many different options. You don't know what they're doing.
Unfortunately, Karen, whilst your aspirations may be laudable, they're not material planning conditions that we can place, and I guess that's the direction the country will be moving as planning policy changes, and we're more considerate about the environment as we go forward. But as we speak, and I suppose it's a relatively good opportunity to sum up, there are a number of things that, listening to people around the committee, that we don't like, or we think could be done better, or however, when we come to our vote, I will draw people to the fact that we must make a decision based on material planning conditions, and even though we don't like the look of it, unless it breaks that condition, or even if we think, oh, I wish they'd done that, and we have had the applicant make some concessions already, we've added a few more conditions, but if people are going to object, then we need to have reasons for that objection that would be upheld at a potential appeal. Now, that is not me trying to tell people not to vote for this. This is me telling people that if you want to object, just have a good reason. Pat, always a word of wisdom from you.
Yeah, I'm not totally sure how this will go, how the committee will go on this one. Given that, I'm concerned. I mean, I would be a lot happier to vote for this if the amenity space outdoors was much better. And I would like to see about a doubling of the garden space for the benefit of residents.
And having checked that,
if we can condition that, you may be in with a chance here.
and having checked that with officers, there are no policy requirements for the size of outdoor space for care homes.
Oh, I know. That's why it's a non-standard suggestion.
Yeah. Okay. Apologies. I've got Lynn and then I've got Owen, and then we're going to come to a debate because we've had come to a conclusion and a vote because we've had a long debate on this. Lynn.
Thank you. And I think there has been a useful discussion, some interesting points raised. I mean, with regard to the conversation about parking and parking for residents, I suppose I'm speaking here partly as, I've been chair of Worcester Dementia Action Alliance for a good number of years, I'm also now at the County Council on the Adult Social Care Panel. Whilst we might wish this home to be something different, there is a difference between a nursing home, a care home, sheltered housing and a retirement village. And the reality almost certainly is that if a person is in need of or wishes to be resident in this establishment, they almost certainly should not be driving, even if they still are. So I think we kind of need, I guess we need to park that. That's a poor use of language. I think it's a bit of a red herring. I think what we've kind of drawn out actually is about the standard and a need to look at mobility scooters, you know, and that is about an indoor resource or a sheltered, a shed or something, and that is a very real issue, you know, for existing homes and properties. I know there's some difficulties now within social housing about people who have a mobility scooter and where they're allowed to keep it and where they can plug it in. So given that we have an ageing population in the county, I think that's a really important policy issue for us to look at, you know, as a planning authority. And actually, I think it's an internal need. It's not really a highways need necessarily.
I think we've picked that point up, though, that there's something we need to look at.
Yeah.
So, apologies, Owen, yeah.
I'm with Councillor Agar on this issue of amenity space and green space. But I'm well aware the only way to create this extra space is to have less brickwork, which means a smaller development. And maybe it's too late to talk about this, but if this were smaller, there would be more green space. And I wonder if it's too late to ask if this can be smaller. And if it is, that'll make me very comfortable.
Well, we have to deal with the application that's before us. So, what I will say, and it's something, again, I think is a learning point for us as a committee and officers, is the picture, the diagram which is on at 719, which is figure 6, the proposed landscaping layout. If you look at it, it is actually, there's quite a lot of green on there when I look at it. The trouble is, the diagram itself is not a particularly what I would call, and trust me as an engineer, art isn't my forte, a rich picture, because there's a lot of green space around the edges of the building, which, where I look at this in this way, there's paths leading to seating areas and whatever. And I don't think perhaps we have done justice in depicting, and I point to the applicant as well, because it's your job to bring these things to light, done justice in highlighting how much potential green space there is. So I think most people in the room have sat there gone, well, that's a bit tight. But doing a quick bit, that looks about 30% to me when you look at the building. Well, and it's not less than 20. But we don't have a percentage to mark on this. So, but we take the comment on the green space, but we have to deal with the application that is in front of us. Again, I think that's a learning point for us, so we can highlight these issues for future. Jenny, we are going to go to the vote unless it's a really pertinent question.
Well, I was going to say that for 78 people, that isn't a great deal of green space, and I think there's overdevelopment on this side.
Again, and that is your opinion. So what we are going to do now, though, is go to the vote, which is those in favour of approving the application. Oh, yeah, go on, I need a proposer and a seconder. So I'll kick it off as the proposer. I'm going to get to that once we've got a proposal. With the conditions, the enhancement of condition 4, there's a condition for a bat survey. Those were the only other 2 conditions I had. Because condition 10 dealt with the other question.
So there are no conditions for increasing green space, there's no condition for...
Well, we can't put a condition to increase green space because that changes the application that is before us. That's not a relevant condition, is it? No. So I've proposed. I've had a seconder in Councillor Hodgson, I believe. So those in favour of approving this application with the noted conditions I just mentioned, please raise your hand.
1, 2, 3, 4.
4. Those against?
1, 2, 3, 4.
Any abstentions? One abstention, and therefore it
You
will
have
go...
a
Pardon?
against.
You're against, eh?
So can we just have the hands for
Yeah,
against
sorry,
again?
come on. It's not difficult. Raise your hand when you're asked. Those in favour of the application, please raise your hand.
4.
Those against?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Okay. Now, those people who have voted against, you're going to need to explain to me the material conditions of why you are voting against this. Because we need to develop that now so officers can go and put together the reasons for objection.
Overdevelopment aside.
Okay, that's one. Okay,
Inadequate usable amenity space outdoors.
okay. So we've got overdevelopment of the site and inadequate amenity space, which I think we've already argued that there is no requirement for that. So that's going to be a difficult point to argue. And I am being pointed because, you know, Marjorie.
Don't we say that new developments must provide adequate amenities for...
We've had the inadequate immediate spot.
I know, but I mean, they haven't got the people who are going in do not have enough amenity space, so that's a good reason. Yes?
That's the point
Okay.
that Pat's raised. Yep. George, any comments on this? So those are the two reasons. George, I'm going to ask for a bit of advice.
Okay, so it would be something on the lines proposals by reason of the amount of developments and lack of outdoor amenity space would fail to provide an adequate living accommodation or living environment for future residents, contrary to policy SWDP 21, probably I would suggest is the only relevant policy. The other thing I would say is, and that's just to safeguard our position with regard to the section 106, is there would need to be a secondary reason relating to making sure that we can get the section 106 as part of any appeal, if that one came forward.
We had the overdevelopment as well. We had the overdevelopment.
Yeah, so that would all come in one.
Okay. The legal advisor is just going to give us some comments.
But if members wish to make a proposal for refusal on the grounds, we need a proposer and a seconder. And if that is the case, then I will then move forward with the appropriate wording for the committee to consider the vote. Thank you, Chair. Through you, Chair. So the proposal now is the refusal contrary to recommendation on the grounds outlined by members, reiterated by Mr Thompson, and the committee will delegate authority to the Corporate Director of Planning and Governance, subject to consultation with the Chair and Vice Chair of the Planning Committee, to confirm the final wording of the grounds and issue the decision notice. All those in favour of the refusal on those grounds? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Those against refusal? 1, 2, 3. Any abstentions? 1. The application is refused, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We now move on to agenda item 9. I apologise, it might be 8 actually. My computer's been slow. It is 8. Agenda item 8. Thank you. Sorry, Laura, on you go.
Thank you, Chair. This application is for the proposed conversion of the upper floors of 63 to 66 Foregate Street into 14 residential self-contained apartments. The upper floors...
Laura, just take a pause while
Sorry, Tom, I've turned it off.
Art sorts himself out.
I'll surround the drinks for everyone now, haven't I? There we are.
Yeah.
I didn't even know Councillor Ames had a mobile phone, so... Now we all know he's got one, he can't hide anymore.
I normally turn it off, so it doesn't ring.
Laura,
Just to recap, yes, so it's the applications for the conversion of 63 to 66 Foregate Street, the upper floors, into 14 residential self-contained apartments. The upper floors were most recently used as offices, which now falls under use class E. In terms of the breakdown, the proposals include 5 one-bedroom apartments and 9 two-bedroom apartments. The application site is a Grade 2 listed building located within the historic city conservation area, and it is on the corner of Foregate Street and Shaw Street within Worcester City Centre. The following next few slides just show some photographs taken at the officer's site visit. As you can see, the building is on the corner of Shaw Street and Foregate Street, with a number of commercial businesses on the lower floors. On Foregate Street elevation, the site is adjacent to the White House Hotel, and Foregate Street rail station is just on the other side of the road. And again, opposite, further views of the Foregate, again, opposite the site with the hot market on the opposite corner, which is just shown on that photograph there behind the bus. Just scroll through the photograph. That's the hot market there, the reddish coloured building. I'm sure people will be aware. As you can see, the site has an existing vehicular access off Shaw Street. As you'll see from the photograph showing the rear of the building, this is a much newer addition to the frontage. It's also evident that there has been an upward extension. You might see from the changing of the brick colour that it looks like it's been extended upwards over the years. And again, this photograph just showing the existing side access gates and the parking area as existing. And just the next view looking towards the adjacent buildings on Shaw Street. Just moving on to the submitted plans, as you will see from the block plan, the proposals do not propose any additional car parking as part of the proposals. However, 8 parking spaces are to be retained that currently serve Shaw Mews and the ground floor businesses within Victoria House. Cycle parking, lighting and bin storage is also shown on the amended layout plan. In terms of cycle parking, in line with Highways policy, a total of 23 cycle spaces is required. In order for this to be implemented, due to the constraints of the site, semi-vertical cycle spaces would need to be proposed. However, as these are not accessible for all cyclists, a total of 6 standard cycle parking spaces have been proposed, along with 14 semi-vertical spaces. It's considered that whilst this does not fall directly in line with standards, it's considered that this approach provides a balance between providing cycle parking, but also providing for those with more accessibility needs. Moving on to the elevations, as you'll see, the existing front elevation of the building. Now the proposed front elevation, just to clarify, there's no changes proposed on this elevation. Now looking at the existing rear elevation, as you can see, these are more recent. These are where the more recent additions are that we saw on the photograph. The most notable changes to the rear are the replacement of the windows. No, sorry, I've just changed. The most notable changes are the replacement of the windows, which include heritage stash style UPVC windows with acoustic glazing. The existing windows that are there are sort of more modern with metal, aluminium windows. As the site is in the listed building and is within the conservation area, we do consider that the proposed materials are important. Therefore, condition 5 that's recommended in the officer's report requires that details and samples are submitted to show us details of the proposed materials before they're first used on site. Just now looking at the existing side elevation. And again, just to propose, there's no changes proposed on this elevation. Now looking at the floor plans, this is the existing lower ground floor. And the proposed lower ground floor, there's no changes proposed on this floor. And on the existing ground floor, and then the proposed, again, there's no changes proposed on this floor. However, as you can see, the existing side accesses are to be retained around the building. Moving to the first floor plan, this is the existing and the proposed. 5 apartments are proposed on this floor. Now moving to the second floor, this is the existing and the proposed. Again, 5 further apartments are also proposed on this floor. And now the existing third floor and the proposed. This proposes 4 larger apartments on the third floor. As the site is located within an area of known poorer air quality, a mechanical ventilation scheme has been sought and submitted by the agent. This is designed to take in and extract air into each of the apartments. As you can see on the next few slides, this shows the extraction, with the red line showing the extraction of the air and the blue showing the intake of fresh air supply. So these are just the plans for the first floor, second floor and third floor. A condition has also been recommended to ensure that the submitted details of the proposed ventilation system are complied with. In terms of its specific specification and operation, this would fall under the requirements of building regulations. Just to sum up really, as we've seen, I mean, the proposals introduced a number of public benefits, including housing and the reuse of the upper floors of the listed building. Both the listed building and conservation area are significant heritage assets, and therefore local authorities must have special regard in preserving and enhancing the character and appearance of heritage assets. The accompanying report covers all of the relevant issues and is taken as read. The key determining issues for members to consider are the design, impact on heritage assets, parking and cycle parking, air quality, and the impact on the amenities of both existing and neighbouring occupants and potential future occupants of the site. So for the reasons set out in section 7 of this report, officers have concluded that on balance, subject to the recommended conditions and the granting of a satisfactory listed building consent and all parties entering into the 106 agreement, the proposals are considered to be acceptable in terms of design, impact on heritage assets and on amenities. Therefore, that considered that the proposals are generally in accordance with the relevant policies within the SWDP and the aims and objectives of the MPPF. Thank you.
Laura, thank you very much for that comprehensive briefing. Are there any good? I've got Councillor Alan Amos and I've got Councillor Lucy Hodgson.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to make a few comments on this one, if I may, because I think this is a seminal planning application, actually. Reading the report, it's quite clear that the intention is to basically plaster the city centre with rabbit hutches with no amenities. Because every time we're going to have a shop or office above a shop, or every time at Pierpoint Street, we had those discussions there on that one, Mr. Chairman. Every time we have a vacant property in the city centre, which may have been former offices or former shops or whatever, we're going to have an application for residential. And I think we need to face this issue head on now, because this will be used as a precedent. I know each on its merits, but this will be used as a precedent for future ones, because if this is acceptable, then all the others will be. Now, specifically on this one, Mr. Chairman, and this is why I'm a little bit suspicious, because obviously we know the money is in residential, it's not in office provision. And on page 20, Economic Development and Regeneration Department have asked a number of questions. It'd be useful to have further information submitted which supports the loss of this use, such as the last known occupier, why the building was vacated, how and for how much the offices have been marketed, as well as what feedback has been received from interested parties during its marketing process, and why they never progressed their interest. In other words, to what extent are these offices being marketed, or are they being left? Because then we can have an application like this saying, well, we can't sell it for offices, so we'll go for residential, and we say yes, okay, because we don't want it empty for too long. I was told, and I could be wrong, it was in the Worcester News, so it could be wrong, it may be right, that one of the reasons why this is no longer used for offices is because due to the lack of parking, employers were struggling to let it, because without parking, people didn't want to come here. So I find it rather ironic that the genesis of this is because they can't let it because of lack of parking, and we're now saying that people are quite happy to come and live here with no parking. Frankly, it's either one thing or the other, but it can't be both. So clearly what we're doing, Mr. Chairman, is we're bringing people into the city centre to live, but where they're going to work. Because with every one of these applications, we're losing office space or employment space. So do we have an employment strategy? Because the only strategy we seem to have is that if it's former employment, take it away, make it residential. So people coming in to live, great. Where they're going to work, haven't got a clue. Just a quick comment on the cycle issue. I don't want to prolong that, but we're providing a lot of space for cycles, which is fine if that's what people want to do. But very recently I visited Worcestershire Parkway Station, and as you will know, Mr. Chairman, probably, there's a covered area for cycles, 32 cycle spaces, covered. We had a big issue about it. There were 2 cycles there, 2. Then I recently have been to Bromsgrove Station. On the ground floor level by exit, there's a circular thing for 18 spaces. 3 were used. But if people think all these cycle spaces are necessary to take up space on where there's virtually, I mean, there's something in the report which says, what about the bin space? Can we reduce that because there's so little space for anything else? But if you want to take all this space for cycles that people aren't going to have, fine. But it comes back to the point, as I was saying, Mr. Chairman, earlier, which is this. The size of these apartments, I don't know why I call them apartments, the word used to be flat, but anyway, we call them apartments, so it sounds better. But they're tiny. We've now got, how many bedrooms is it? I think it's 23 bedrooms in total. So that could be a total, yes, 23 bedrooms. So that could be a total of 46 people. Fine, if some of them have children, as they may well do. There's no amenity space. We just heard for a previous discussion. It's an issue. And finally, and I do want an answer to this question, Mr. Chairman, I keep asking it, and I never get an answer, or I get different answers. So if I could have an answer, which is the same as the last one I had, I would be grateful. Where is the evidence which says that people who live in the city centre also work in the city centre, such that it's easy for them to get to work because they can walk or they can cycle, or go by bus, because they're all living in the city centre and they work in the city centre. There is, of course, no evidence of that whatsoever, actually, and that's what bothers me, because people will have a car for other purposes, may not be for work, they will have a car, and that car is going to be parked somewhere. And we all know people don't like to pay for parking, so there's going to be a displacement effect. It's inevitable. They're not all going to park in the Crown Gate overnight, and I understand the conditions for that is now quite onerous, and it's quite expensive as well. So they're not all going to go park in Crown Gate somewhere. So where is the evidence, Mr. Chairman, for the assumption in this report, which is that people, because they live in the city centre, all they need is a pair of legs and a bike, because they're not going to have cars. If they are going to have cars, then why don't we provide parking? So, in essence, Mr. Chairman, what I'm saying is, to conclude my comments, is that this development, and all the future ones that are going to come along, and the ones we've had, are simply not sustainable. They are not sustainable. And it does make me laugh when I see in the report, we've got to support it because it's sustainable. It isn't sustainable. I'll ask the question again, and I'll probably get the same answer this time. What discussions have we had with the NHS about the provision of doctor surgeries, about hospital capacity, about school capacity, and about parking capacity? All these things are going to be needed. Already, all of those services are beyond saturation breaking point, and we're going to put more on top of that. And it is highly irresponsible, and it's not sustainable, and I think we're going down the wrong road. I'm sure this is going to go through today, but it'll do it over my objection and reservations, because these are serious points. If we don't address them, Mr. Chairman, we're going to have a very uncomfortable city centre in years ahead. In past decades, as I walked around Worcester city centre just before I moved to Worcester, I was staggered by the damage that planning had done to this city, knocking down parts of, putting a multi-storey car park in Fry Street, beyond belief, and all the rest of it. We regret all those decisions because it was fashionable at the time. This is the same, this is what's going to happen. And I very much regret we are going to destroy our city if we go on and on like this. Every time there's a bit of space, a spare office, wherever it is, we fill it with residential, so-called apartments, but they're rabbit hutches, and I feel sorry for the people who are going to live there.
Thank you, Councillor Amos. I pulled a few questions out of there, which I hope officers managed to get, but the two big ones for me were, have we had discussions with the NHS? And I think we need an explanation of the definition of sustainable city centre policy.
Okay, so
Over to you.
thank you. Let's, in effect, again, NHS and are consulted on every single application, as our education. There's no requirement under our policy or SPD for education contributions, and under I think, is that right? Am I right with that one on education? Education, yes, no, there's no education. In terms of marketing, again, unfortunately, that is not part of your policy. The MPPF as a material consideration, and the answer to both those questions is yes. So the development plan is when taken as a whole, and the MPPF, which promotes the reuse of upper floors as residential accommodation. As I say, that is those kind of aspects. Marketing, there is no requirement within plan policy for marketing of city centre office accommodation in effect, so there's no requirement within policy, and therefore, whilst we note economic development comments, there is no requirement for us to actually carry out, or the applicant to carry out, the information required. In terms of your comment on rabbit hutches, or the we've talked before about national space standards or national space standards. Even though it's not part of our policy, I would highlight that all the apartments are above, and in some cases significantly above, national space standards. So even if we adopted this as planning policy, we would be saying to you that the national space standards have been met and are exceeded in the application. I think those are the principal ones, Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I take my hat off to Mr. Thompson for coming up with those answers. I give him 1 out of 10, but perhaps we could just have answers to the other two big questions, and they are big questions, Mr. Chairman, because they're fundamental ones, which is that where is the evidence that people who live in the city centre work in the city centre, such that, unlike most other people, the 85% of Worcestershire, they don't need a car, so they can choose to walk or cycle or get a bus, because that's the assumption in this report, Mr. Chairman. And the other question is, I'm very pleased to see that even though this council shamefully hasn't adopted minimum standards, these flats in this case do meet those minimum standards. But where is the amenity? What do people do? Are they cooped up? Or just imagine recent hot weather. Where do these people go? There's no garden, there's no green space, there's no amenity, there's nothing Do we want people to live in this kind of accommodation? Because that's what we're going to do, Mr. Chair. We're going to condemn people if we keep approving these kinds of things. There's no amenity whatsoever.
Doesn't need to have parking comes from some national study that was done that demonstrates. So I don't think it's an in-house thing that we've done, is it? This is a national policy that we've adopted. Am I correct?
Yeah, so in effect, when we talk about parking levels or parking, if we want to adopt space standards or parking standards within our national policy, we would have to show the evidence of, which is again notoriously difficult to actually prove, but I would imagine it's in census data. But in effect, what you would have to say is these are the movements, these are where we have parking requirements, and then we've got to also include in that exemptions. So exemptions might be, for example, listed buildings, which this is, because you don't want to knock down a historic building just to put up to put additional car parking spaces in, or alter a historic building in a way that you wouldn't do otherwise. So again, there has to be exemptions, there has to be determinations on the circumstances. The simple fact of the matter is the MPPF and PPG 13 before that, for those who may remember that one pre-2010, all stated that in effect, if you put people in sustainable, and I use the word sustainable, in those locations where there is a good access to public transport, buses, trains and the like, and also then they have shops and services within close walking facilities, then people can make a choice as to where they live, particularly young people, young people on the housing market, young professionals, people who want to live in these locations, as I did when I was in my early 20s, that you make a choice as to how you live in terms of those kind of aspects. In terms of use of green space, you then also have on your doorstep the larger parks, so Gulliver Park, the Pitchcroft and all the walking routes around the city centre, but you make a choice because you have Tesco's, Asda, all the shops and services, the cafes and all the other kind of things that are on your doorstep, so you can make a choice. And obviously COVID has also taught us we can work from, a lot of people are still working from home, so you do have vacant offices and those kind of things that have become increasingly less popular. So the situation is I'm afraid this is a direction that nationally is already catered for in terms of policy. We are already encouraged to use these buildings, and in terms of parking levels, that is again what we were encouraged to do, and we would have to come up with evidence that I'm pretty certain Karen would say we don't have in those kind of things as to what is the harm to highway safety. Again, either through the indiscriminate parking. Well, again, you can't see that at the moment through the use of the offices. So again, you've also got to balance what the building was previously used for. So if that car parking requirement is not there, then and hasn't caused indiscriminate parking, yes, it's a different perhaps profile, but again, there isn't. There wouldn't be evidence to support either way, I would suggest.
I'm not going to give you an opportunity to come back again, Councillor Amos, because I know you'll never be satisfied on this one, but you've had a very lengthy and detailed explanation. I've got people who've asked to speak. I've got Lucy, I've got Owen, I've got Lynn Denham, and I've got Jenny Barnes. And I've got Marjorie, and I've got Karen, and I've got Pat. So basically, everyone wants to have a say. And I'm going to save myself to the end as well. But I will say, what I'm going to make a comment now, when you live in a city centre, and I'm a proper city boy, then the amenity of the riverside, I would say, was 100 yards away from that location, well, maybe 200 yards. So there is quite a lot of local amenity, I would suggest, when you're talking about flat living. But in that order, Lucy, Owen, Lynn, Jenny, Karen, Marjorie, Pat.
Obvious question, but what proportion is affordable? And houses going to be for rent or for sale? So the flats.
It's a brownfield site, so there's no requirement on affordable housing.
It's not that it's a brownfield site, to correct you there.
Sorry.
It's not a brownfield site,
Sorry.
it's a vacant building.
Vacant building.
So
Apologies,
the vacant building credit which comes in, and again, that's a national practice guidance, there's no requirement for affordable housing. In terms of whether they're for rent or sale, that is, as they will be open market, that will be a matter for the developer.
I then had Owen.
Thanks, Chair. I do share some of Councillor Amos's points about parking, but I appreciate the officer's response that nobody's forced to live here and you can choose to live in a city centre. And if that means that you don't have any parking, you've made that decision to move there. I understand that. But my main question is about provision for bins and refuse. And I'm just wondering, can I get some clarity on if there is enough bin provision and how many bins are expected to be there for this number of flats, please? Sorry, apartments.
Laura, you can pull up a picture if you want, but it's up to you.
Yes, I mean, there is refuse provision. You may have just seen it next to the cycle parking on one of the slides. Also, that refuse services have commented and they haven't raised any objections to the proposal. So there is refuse provision there.
I expected there to be some.
Thank you, Owen. I've now got Lynn.
Thank you. Yeah, my question relates to the energy statement, which is paragraph 7.39. I'm not sure I was aware. So are we saying that in a conservation area or on a listed building, it's not possible to install any kind of renewable energy, any kind of solar panels, is the first question. And then being mindful of the need to reduce energy use, etc., can we put some condition then around, maximising the insulation of the building, and can the energy statement requirement be met in that way?
I think in terms of renewable energy at the site, it's because it's a redevelopment of an existing building, so it's there's not actually a requirement to meet the 10% energy requirement at the site, you see.
Just to follow that up, Councillor, I think it's a weakness perhaps of your policy. There's no requirement. It's not saying you can't do it, but it's just saying there's no requirement to do it. So if, as I say, that would be part of our discussions. But as I say, there's also the fact that you also have embodied carbon and those kind of aspects. And in terms of reusing a building, you're not creating new building materials, but new waste or anything on those kinds. So there's what we call the embodied carbon that is actually incorporated.
I think if we had, we're suggesting solar panels on the roof of this building, Heritage would have been sat around this table somewhere. I think someone once mentioned it for the Guildhall, and I think they were shot at dawn. But yeah, no, I take your point, Lynn. It's where we get that friction between what we want to do and, and an older building. But anyway, so thank you, Lynn. I've now got Jenny.
Thank you, Chair. Well, the work's already started, so when you walk past, you can see that work has started. So it's a bit frustrating. Walking past as well, in the courtyard area, there used to be two lovely cherry trees that really gave definition to that space, and they've been cut down, and they've gone a little while now, but it's really disappointing that they've gone. That space is considered the amenity space. Basically, it's a bin store and cycle store. Nowhere for people to maybe dry their clothes, those sort of fairly fundamental things that, especially in an energy crisis and global warming, actually somewhere outside to dry stuff is quite a practical solution to some of the ongoing issues. Now, I take the point about the 15-minute city where if you get on a bus or cycle, you can probably get to almost everywhere within the city. So I'm not so concerned about that, although I'm sure that people will bring cars onto that site and there'll be further congestion. And that road is particularly congested anyway. My final point is apartment 9, according to the Conservation Advisory Panel, second floor apartment 9, the 2 bedrooms shown are too small. It'd be better not to divide the existing room, but keep it as one space. Has that been taken on board?
Yeah, again, yes, it has been taken on board. We've done the checks, and that would meet, again, it would meet national space standards. So in effect, it's more than the second bedroom is more than national space standards, so it would meet the requirements of that. So I understood, because I was there, so I understood what they were saying. So or online, as it's all virtual. So as I say, but when we looked at the plans and we looked at what actually the space available was, the space was more than appropriate to meet and in fact exceed national space standards for that bedroom. So we couldn't echo those concerns.
And on the other points?
Again, those are the choices you have to make when you make a list, when you're dealing with a listed building. You don't want to alter the historic fabric of the building. Again, it's quite a constrained site in that respect with all the other surrounding buildings and uses. I will point out that there are ground floor permissions that have been granted planning permission, so some of that work to number 63 might be what you're actually seeing. So it might not be retrospective.
I've got Karen, then I've got Marjorie, and then I've got Pat.
Thank you, Chair. I've got 2 questions. Firstly, it's about the replacement windows. In the design and access statement, it talks about black powder coated aluminium frame windows. There was a comment in the from an external person about putting sash windows in instead, so they're more in keeping with the building. Has that been given any thought, please?
Yes, I can say that during the course of the application, the windows have been amended, so they're now the UPVC, but they are heritage style sash windows. So yes, that's good.
Okay, and then I just want to make a wider point, which is basically, Councillor Amos, you're right, this is going to be something that's going to expand over the city centre. And one of the problems that we've got in the city centre, particularly on these kinds of roads, is actually the noise and air pollution. This has got a mechanical ventilation system, and obviously that goes through building regs and there'll be maintenance. But it is shown that people don't necessarily want mechanical ventilation in their bedrooms and in their lounges. People do accept it more in kitchens and bathrooms. People are used to putting fans on and have extract. But bedrooms, people often turn it off because they don't want the noise, they don't want the hum. And what they're finding in buildings around the country is that you're getting internal poor air quality, and also with internal drying of washing you get damp and mould, so the internal environment can be impacted by having a fully mechanical system. I think this has a wider impact. Actually, is the road outside is extremely noisy. We saw from the noise report there's going to be mitigation which will take it down a certain amount, but it gets up to 100 decibels. You know, that's enough to damage your ears if you're exposed to it over a length of time. And we're going to be putting more residential homes next to busy, polluted roads. We've got to do something about those roads. If we can't do anything about it in the application, please, can we do something about the roads? Okay, thank you.
Karen, thank you for that. You might want to have a chat with the leader of your group who wants to put living above the shops as one of his policies. But I'll be slightly facetious, but yeah, no problem. And then, I've then got Marjorie.
I think the use of these, thanks Chair, I think the use of the upper floors of these buildings for residential accommodation is a good move, but although I accept that the space standards have been met, I do think it looks dreadfully cramped. And I'm a little bit concerned about two of the flats. If you have a look on page 13, apartment 1 is 1 bedroom and it's 59 square metres. Apartment 2 has 2 bedrooms and it's 61. That's practically the same. So 2 bedrooms have been sort of crammed in, where in the flat next door there's only 1. And the same applies further down. Oh no, it doesn't. Oh yes, it does. Apartments 6 and 7. The first is 1 bedroom, it's got 62 square metres. The second is 2, and it's got 61, so it's actually smaller. Are we quite sure that those 2 flats in particular are within the required standards?
I'm going to defer to Andrew, but one of them might just be a really big 1-bedroom flat. I don't know, but Andrew.
Yeah, so the national space standards for a 1-bedroom flat, or for a 2-bedroom flat, is 61 square metres. So it would be a large 1-bedroom flat. That's just the way the layout works.
In which case then I've got Pat.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, some of my concerns have been addressed. I think you know that I was concerned about the windows, and I was pleased to hear Laura's comments. I would only want to add to that, I would hope we would keep after them about that, because we have a lot of experience of not getting what we ask for when it comes to windows on heritage buildings. So I do hope that enforcement, and we'll take a look at that at an early stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pat. I'm going to make a comment. When I look around the table, I see all of us of an age where we probably can have some of these challenges to officers about why is it not bigger, and then I think of myself as an 18-year-old and think, oh God, I'd have done anything just to get in a flat. Yeah, it is quite a long time ago as well. So I think we do have to be cognizant that younger people have different needs and requirements and expectations, and as long as we're not approving something that is below a national standard, it may not be somewhere we want to live because it's in the middle of a high street and it's quite noisy, but I think as a 19, 20-year-old, that's exactly where I'd want to live, because it was close to the nearest pub, it was near a train station, I had a Sainsbury's across the road, and McDonald's around the corner, so I wouldn't have eaten healthily. But yeah, it is a comment more than anything, but I'm trying to put myself in the mind of my 22-year-old daughter who's lived in a different accommodation every week of the year for the last 12 months as she's moved around the country. And it's varied, but she's never once complained that it's been bad. It's always been, oh, it's better than that. Oh, sorry, I'm having a ramble. But I am trying to put myself in the mind of a younger person who probably see these as a really good opportunity. But never to say, we can only vote on material considerations, not on the meanderings of Chris Mitchell. So I apologise, Lynn.
Yes, I mean, if I can kind of make a comment as, you know, Cathedral Ward councillor, I see lots of these, and actually this is significantly better than many. These are absolutely not rabbit hutches, because I looked back to check, you know, I did look at this application when it came in February, and if they are below the space standards or anywhere near that, then I do challenge officers. So this is significantly better than many. It seems to me that the applicant has been fairly responsive to dialogue with the planners and with policy, you know, with regard to parking spaces and those kinds of things. So I think, you know, that is a positive. It is also, I kind of have to remind people, it's only because this is a listed building that it is here. You know, my understanding is the current government have made policy that if it's not a listed building, any office can be converted into any rabbit hutch without any intervention from the planning authorities. You know, and around this building, but with planning permission, you know, are it's actually a residential area. You know, and I say this quite frequently in other meetings. The city centre is increasingly a residential area, which, you know, the people that live in those places are happy to live in. It is sustainable. You've only got to fall out of bed to catch the train. So I would, if you want, I'll propose the recommendation to accept.
Thank you, Lynn. We've had a proposer in Lynn and a seconder in Pat. So in which case, I would then go to the vote. Those in favour of approving the application with the conditions attached, please raise your hand.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Those against? And it would be a pleasure to record it, Councillor Amos. That's no problem. I'll get someone else to write it. I won't be able to spell it. Any abstentions? No, thank you. In which case, that application is passed. We now move on to agenda item 9, which is the listed building consent that is attached to the application we've just had. I don't intend to ask you to go through the whole presentation again, as we've just seen it, but if you could give us an outline, Laura, that would be really helpful.
Yes, that's no problem. Is it okay if we have the slides? I've just added a few for detail. Yes, so the next one. The next application, as we've seen, is for the listed building consent for the proposed changes to facilitate the change of use. As I say, most of my presentation will be a repeat if I was to go through it all, but I've just focused on the changes to the building itself. Again, just a location plan showing where the building is. So this is the first floor plans, I believe. Yes, first floor plans, just the existing and the proposed with, if you can see the red dotted lines, it may be difficult to see, but the red dotted lines are wall structures that are to be removed, and the blue are wall structures that are, to be inputted. It's just important to note that there are a number of partition walls that have been added over the years to the building to facilitate the use as offices, so they're not all original walls that are to be removed. And again, just looking at the second floor existing and then the proposed, again, third floor and the proposed. Again, as we've discussed, the changes to the rear elevation just include the changes to the windows from metal to the UPVC heritage style sash windows. I believe it is, yes. I think that's there as existing. So the accompanying report covers all the relevant issues and is taken as read. So for reasons set out in section 7 of this report, officers have concluded that on balance, subject to the satisfactory compliance with the recommended conditions and the approval of obviously a satisfactory planning consent, it's considered that the proposals would have some impact on the listed building as a heritage asset. It is however considered that the proposals are of sensitive design, which would also see the reuse of the vacant upper floors of the building. It is therefore considered that the proposals are in accordance with SWDP policies 6 and 24 and the aims and objective of the MPPF.
Thank you, Laura. I mean, we've had a long debate about the application previously, which is one of the conditions that you had to approve the application before we get to this point. Anyone have any comments on that Laura's just said, or questions? I've got Pat.
It's our duty, in fact, to try and enhance a listed building. And I think this does certainly enhance the facade. The interior is of less concern because, as we've heard, it's been altered a lot over the years. So I think this is an excellent way to use it.
Thank you, Pat. Any other questions? Pat, does that mean you're happy to propose? Do I have a seconder in Owen? Thank you very much. Then in which case, are we happy to approve the... sorry, I thought you were about to ask a question, Lucy. You got ahead of yourself. To recommend that the Planning Committee grants listed building consent subject to the conditions set out in section 9 and the grant of satisfactory planning commission. Those in favour, please raise your hand.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Those against? Consistent. Consistency is the maker of the man. Thank you, Councillor Amos. And any abstentions? None. Thank you. In which case, that application is passed.
Just a quick point of order. Councillor Barnes has quite rightly pointed out there could be retrospective, works going on this site, unauthorised. They may or may not be related to this application. But could an officer please check up, because it doesn't bode well if the committee has voted for something to ever find the developers have totally ignored or disrespected this committee and this council by undertaking works without permission.
Noted. I will ask one of the enforcement officers to arrange a site meeting. As I said, we do have permission. There is a new shopfront and refit of number 63 going on as well, so on the ground floor. But again, we'll double check that.
Jenny, yeah, do you want to...
Point of information, when I walked past the doorway, which is the access to those flats on a higher floor, there was clearly rubble on the floor and one of the rubble buckets just inside the door. They are working on it.
Send enforcement round. Thank you.
Can I just seek your guidance, because you are a very wise man.
And you're even wiser to have noticed.
given that planning permission has been granted, it puts in what is the position? Because frankly, it isn't acceptable at any time for any developer to carry out work that's unauthorised. Now, what bothers me is because they've now probably calculated they were going to get permission, they've done it without permission. And so what are the sanctions, or what could the response be from the enforcement officer once it's been round? And I suspect Councillor Barnes is right. We find unauthorised work has taken place.
I'm sure officers will correct me, but if a developer commences a development without without an approved planning application, they do so at their own risk, and enforcement action can be taken. Should they then successfully get planning application and the work they've been doing is in accordance with that, then that risk has been alleviated. Am I correct? Yes. So they're taking a chance and they got away with it, in summary.
Yeah, I think, again, I need to understand what the work that's being carried out is, whether or not there's now any breaches of planning conditions that we're going to be issuing. So again, I need to understand what they've done, or if they have done work and what they've done, and whether that's affected the historic building, or whether or not all these kind of things. As I say, that's why I need the investigation to take place before I can comment as to whether or not it's a breach of condition, or whether or not we need a temporary stop notice just to ensure those conditions are met. That's the nature of the investigation. That's something we'll find out.
With figure.
With figure, noted.
So we're now going to go to agenda item 11. I'm going to ask for a 2-minute comfort break, if that's okay, because I'm a man who used to be able to sit for 5 hours at a regimental dinner without going to wee, having drinking all the time. I'm struggling now. So I need to take a comfort break if that's okay. But everyone else, if you want to grab a cup of coffee or something, please do. 2 minutes. Okay, everybody, I think we're ready to start. Thank you very much for allowing me a 2-minute comfort break. Paul, over to you.
Right, it's my pleasure to present the 2022 version of the Heritage Risk Report. You've had a copy of, oh, it's working, there we are. That's the cover of it, featuring 55-57 Lowesmore, which is included in the report. The summary there is basically, there's currently 18 buildings and structures within the report, 3 scheduled monuments and 1 conservation area. This year there are no heritage assets to be removed. If you remember, Chairman and members who were on the committee last year, we did take 3 off. That was an unusual set of circumstances. I think there were 3 that were very close to being finished the previous year, and so they've been concluded. The following are undergoing repairs, restoration work or maintenance, and they are testimony that keeping the register as a spotlight on a problem can focus initiatives and produce action. The 3 R's, Church of St Helen, the city walls and the ice factory, and I'm going to look at them in some detail now. The Church of St Helen, those of you, it's very visible, it's in the high street, up the top end of the high street towards the cathedral end. It's had various scaffolding and various things happening to it over the years. Most of the repair work is done. There's a little bit remaining to the south aisle and the lowest stage of the tower. We don't normally remove things from the register until all the works necessary to restore them and repair them are complete. So this one is staying on. It is also to the advantage of the people doing the restoration work for it to remain on our register to satisfy the needs of some of their grant funders as well. So that, for those reasons, it's been kept on. This is an interesting one. It's the collapse of the city wall section down the Butts. It happened towards the end, about November 2019. A solution was agreed. We've worked very closely with Nick Carter of Historic England on this because it's also a scheduled ancient monument. I was thinking about this the other day. It's actually a very good testimony to the strength of the original city wall, that it actually needs this level of engineering to retain what some stones and some lime mortar had been doing for a few centuries. But it's in reinstating it, it was decided to put this very strong reinforced concrete section. The things across the bottom, which you can just see, those are called weep holes. They allow the water to escape as it rises above the water table. And the stone, which fell down, has been kept on site, and it'll be refaced in that, so it will look as much as it can how it did. But again, that is not finished, and it's taken a lot longer than we thought it would do because of the additional engineering work required. The ice factory is progressing. Those photographs are from a couple of years ago. If you look on their website, it says all units sold, but there's 2 phases to it. If members remember the application, there was a new build phase at the back, and that's the phase that's completed and now fully occupied, and this is phase 2, which is a bit nearer completion than it shows in those images, but it is still not there, and that is why the completion of the scheme is required prior to us taking it off the register. There are 3 heritage at risk lists produced for the City of Worcester. There's the one that we're talking about and hopefully adopting this afternoon. One produced by Historic England, which does actually agree with ours, but there's a couple of extra things in which we've always had in our register. And Save Britain's Heritage, completely independent organisation. They do their own look, I think mainly on planning applications, and they have come across 2 additional ones. And talking through with my managers, Andrew and Duncan, I thought it made sense that our register included everything that anybody could look up about buildings at risk in Worcester. So I propose adding these 2 Grade 2 listed buildings, 13 the tithing. It's at risk because a consented conversion. Apologies to Councillor Amos because it is for it's for accommodation above, but the consent is there. The consent, it's got about 17 or 18 months to go, but there's been no evidence of work having started on it, so we're keeping an eye on that one. And the other one is this building here, St Cuthbert's Chapel and Morven Road. They had a consent way back, in fact almost exactly 10 years ago. Enough of that has been enacted for that consent to still be alive. We don't actually know the condition of it, but I've spoken to people who live locally to it, and they say it doesn't look to be in any bad condition. So we're including these from Save's register for the sake of completeness, but they aren't necessarily ones that at this stage give us great cause for concern. Changes in the ownership development proposal are also in progress for the following buildings which were on the register: the Great Illicity Corn Exchange and the Scala Theatre in Angel Street. The Corn Exchange, which people who lived in Worcester a while will remember, was Habitat, and then it was Ask Italia, and it's been vacant for a number of years. It's recently been acquired by the City Council as part of a scheme for the refurbishment of it, jointly with the Scala. So for many years nothing seemed to be happening to this, and something is now happening, and it is within our hands and our control. And adjoining it and wrapping around the corner of Angel Place is the Scala Theatre, vacant in a poor state of repairs internally. Again, we've acquired it. There's a firm of architects that are working a scheme up together, and they're doing that jointly with number 8 Angel Street, which members will remember as the Co-op, and people who want to say how old they are might remember it as a car showroom. Colmore Depot. Before your time, yes, before your time, Councillor Reynolds. It replaced the Theatre Royal in Angel Street in about 1964. So that is going to be sort of costume storage, rehearsal space and everything. And it's sufficiently close to the Scala to do. So those are all good news stories, but until the schemes are developed and the work has happened, we're not going to do anything with them. The changes in priority, there are 6. The city walls that we looked at, the priority is rather strange. Almost everything that you encounter in life, like academic grades for assessments and things like that, start like A going down to F or 1 going down to 5 or something. These priorities, for some reason, start high and go low. I don't quite understand it, but for consistency across the register that we produced over the years, we've stuck with it. So City Wall south of the Butts, which we looked at, has gone from a C to an E, which ordinarily means it's got worse, but actually means it's got better. Chester St Helen has gone to an F, which is the lowest grade of priority, and 1A and 3 Angel Street, which the City Council has also acquired, they have gone from C to D, as a Corn Exchange. 78 to 83 St John's, which is a zigzag one. Yes, it's coming up, and the Scala Theatre as well, which has gone to a D. Mention that one because we've not featured it so far. It's been lingering on for a while. We have had the owner in for discussion. Good. And we are I believe, Chairman, you were saying at Chairman's briefing that there was something actually happening on the site, and you said you'd seen some activity.
They've taken the old structure down.
Yeah.
They've taken the old structure down, I know, but I haven't seen the new structure, which has a approved application, if I remember correctly, for accommodation.
Yes, it has.
Flats.
Yes, flats, not apartments, flats.
Thank you.
So
are we doing questions as we go along, Mr. Chairman, or do you want them at the end?
Can we do them at the end? I think that would.
Do them at the
We're nearly there, actually, Chairman, if we can just continue. This is a new thing I thought, just out of my own interest. I thought I'd like to know how long some of these things have been on the register, so I compile this, and I thought, well, this is good to include in the register. So it's the year that things are added to the register and the number of them added. And when you do a bit of analysis, it shows that most have been on the register for 10 years or less, and the 3/4 of them have been included for 6 years or less. So that just gives you some idea of how long things have been on it. And we've now come on, Councillor Amos and others, to questions.
Anyone, any questions? Yep, I've got Alan, I've got Lucy, I've got Marjorie.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Well, obviously it is, as Dr. Collins is quite right, it's about the St John's one. I just want to ask that, because if I recall, it went from a C to a D, which is an improvement.
Yes, the improvement was that something was happening.
Well, I think that's an improvement. I think it's a miracle. But could we just have an update, Mr. Chairman? Because the problem is it's not just the building in itself. The whole appearance of St John's, it is dreadful. And it has been there for 10 years now. It's an awful long time. You know, we've just done all the roads and the pavements to try to put some life into St John's. And this is a horrible gap right in the centre of the high street, in effect. And it's been like that for a long time. And I've had discussion with Dr. Collins in the past, and also with Nick Kay, really. And I just wondered, you know, obviously it's with hindsight, whether we could have done something tougher or stronger. But could I have the sort of up-to-date position now? Because obviously, if you look at Caudles, for example, just look at it. I mean, you know, it has condition very bad. Well, it could be, obviously, it could serve the purposes of some developers for the whole thing to collapse altogether. And that's what bothers me. They know that if you leave it long enough, it will just collapse, or accidentally get knocked down, like trees get accidentally chopped down. So, but because it's blighting a whole shopping centre of the city, I'd be grateful for an update.
Through you, Chairman, thank you very much indeed. In fact, Councillor Amos will have expected me to have anticipated that question, which I did, and I've asked our enforcement team, who that were involved in the meeting we had with the owner, about that for an update. Unfortunately, they couldn't provide me one in time for this afternoon, but when that information comes through, I can relay, first of all, to you, Councillor Amos, and then to the committee, and perhaps it can come under any other business or something at a future meeting, if you find that satisfactory.
No, that's very helpful, Chairman. Dr. Collins, just tell me what the timescale is to get that report update.
I will chase it off the back of your question this afternoon tomorrow, and I'll stress the urgency of it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Lucy.
I've got two questions. First of all, the war memorial on Litchfield Avenue. What's the state of that?
Okay, we'll deal with that one first. In fact, Councillor Agar raised that with me,
Yeah.
Chairman's briefing as well. It's
place
more
for it.
vulnerable than at risk, and it's vulnerable because the what is to happen to that undeveloped part of the site is up in the air at the moment. There's ideas about a replacement church going on there and all sorts of things, but there's nothing concrete, if you pardon the use of the word, there at the moment. The memorial itself is not actually in a dangerous condition as a structure. And again, as I mentioned to Councillor Agar on Tuesday, there are a number of local residents who do take great care of it, and if you follow social media for the area, you'll see that there's photographs from earlier this month and from June, and it gets poppies put on it for Remembrance Sunday and everything. So the structure itself, which has already survived a move from Shrub Hill in the late 60s to its present site. So I think it remains there not because the structure itself is in any danger, it remains there because the future of its setting and surroundings are there. But obviously, with it, one of the reasons for keeping it on the register is that if and when some proposals come forward, its future in that position and how it is treated within any proposed development will be a material consideration, and without it perhaps being on this register, it might slip under the radar. So that's that.
I got it put on when I was the county councillor for Nunnery back in about 2011. Mm-hmm. So I've got a soft spot for it. But the other one is 3 Trotsell Lane East. That is in my ward.
Yes.
So
I had anticipated that one coming up, and I've spoken to a local resident about that this week. It was featured on the cover of the register last year. And there had, I think, just before that register came out and was adopted, been a fire. So people had broken in and set fire to the kitchen. It hadn't done a tremendous amount of damage, but it was perhaps an indication of what could happen. 2 things have happened since then. First of all the ground floor windows have been boarded up and it's now secure. And the second thing is, one of the reasons why people were able to break in and mess around outside it was the fact that it was very, very overgrown. So people could not be seen getting up to no good. So that photograph was taken by Mr. Lester, our enforcement officer, a couple of weeks ago, so that is pretty much the current state of play of it.
Thought in my old life we used to call that camouflage.
I think so. Sorry, carry on.
Obviously it's priority A.
Yeah.
And so what will happen to it? And would it ever be able to, would it ever be able to inhabit again or something?
Hopefully so. The difficulty is with the owner, who is very unresponsive.
Yes.
We all know who we're talking about, and the circumstances behind it. The owner currently resides in another building on the site. It is a matter of repeated enforcement, and ultimately following that route through. There is a section in the report about the actions that are available to us. It might end up with us having to force repurchase it in order to do something about it.
Could there be some? It's been on for quite a long time.
Yes, yes, I imagine
so
probably since the
could there
first
be
one.
something?
Yeah. Okay.
Sort of to be able to make it habitable or something like that.
Yes. Yes. No, I agree, because the longer it stays like that, the
Yes.
less chance there is of bringing it back into use. Again, I will get, as with the question that Councillor Amos said, I'll get an answer to you as a matter of priority.
That would be lovely.
And then we can come back to committee next time.
Yes.
Thank you, Paul. Marjorie, you had a question?
Yes, thanks, Chair. Paul, I'm a bit confused about 55 to 57 Lowesmore, because there are two entries for it. Number 7 and 22, but the buildings seem to be different ones.
The photograph at 22 is of the same building, but it's to illustrate the conservation area. The conservation area as a whole is at risk.
Okay.
Yeah, so it just happens to be a photograph of the same building. It's a different photograph of the same building, but it's the same building.
Sorry, say that again.
No, I say it's a different photograph of the same building, but it is the same building. But in the item 22, it is to illustrate the fact that the Lowesmore conservation area, and particularly Lowesmore itself as the core of that conservation area, is at risk because of the condition of the buildings and the way that they've been treated over the years.
Okay, I understand.
Okay, that's okay. It's a confusion, but we couldn't find another photograph that illustrated it. There we are.
Got Lynn.
Thank you. Yeah, mine's a question relating to number 21, the Gilding House, which is
Yes.
in my world.
Yes.
In fact, I was to meeting this week with residents and with a representative from Berkeley Homes.
Yeah.
Allegedly, it's up for sale. What I was asking and couldn't establish is it part of a package of other bits of land on the porcelain site, or is it purchasable on its own, so to speak?
I can't directly answer that question, but I do know through other discussions that we're having within the department that I think Berkeley Homes are looking to finish their connection with the site, because we're talking about other aspects of the consent, which goes back a number of years now. I do know that when the buildings with the frontages on 7th Street were being developed, talking to the architect then, he did mention to me that it had been offered to him as part of that scheme. He didn't actually take it up. So, and there are, of course, a couple of buildings on the site. The Bone Mill is the best example, which is virtually undevelopable into anything else because it retains such a high level of equipment inside it. So it virtually got to be what it's got to be and can't really be anything else. I can't guarantee to get something back to you within the next few days, but we are having some meetings to do with this wrapping up of things to do with Berkeley Homes' involvement with the site. Some dates have been suggested. They do go on into early September. I will make a mental note and be a point of raising this question when we're having those discussions and try and get you an answer to that. Because I think it's a concern to us all, because it's been, I mean, the whole thing happened before I started here 7 years ago. So it must be going on, more than 10 years, I would have thought.
I mean, for what it's worth, the Berkeley Homes representative at the residents' meeting said they are now inspecting the building, and at least doing some kind of minimalistic repairs or whatever. And I did say, well, you know, inspecting it to watch as to how many bricks have fallen off when is not the same as regeneration or making use
I mean,
of it.
it's good that they're monitoring the condition of it and doing some repairs, but it is not a solution. It's certainly not enough to get it off this register. No.
Thank you, Paul.
Okay.
Unless there are any other questions, I've got Pat.
Thank you. If I can just give Councillor Hodgson some reassurance, I do stay in touch, close touch with the church wardens about this one, about the war memorial. And as you say, other residents do keep an eye on it. So I'm fairly confident that it won't be messed about too much in the near future anyway. And the other question I wanted to ask, we don't actually have any registered battlefields at risk, do we?
No, we don't.
I've had the odd Barney planning committee before about unregistered battlefield areas, such as, you know, various farms of our we would know about.
There are a couple just literally just the other side of the city boundary.
Right.
But not within the city boundary. But that's mentioned for the sake of completeness, to be quite honest.
So are we in touch
they are
with
the things
Malvern about them?
Well, registered battlefields are one of the things that we are required to include on heritage at risk registers. It just happens that we don't actually have any within our.
So are we in touch with Malvern about them? Because I presume it's in Malvern area.
I should imagine that Malvern is taking care of them themselves, to be honest.
Okay,
I would hope so.
Jenny.
Thank you. It's good that we're moving forward on some of these properties. Have we had any wins that have come off the list in the last year?
No, we haven't. We had 3 come off last year. As I say, I think those 3 that I identified, which was St Helens and the City Walls repair project was the other one, and there was one other one as well, which I think that they are you know, that sort of close to being ready. But it's quite a strict thing. In fact, I always say it's easy to get something on one of these registers than it is to take it off. And at least ours is slightly easier than Historic England's. Historic England's require the repairs to be done and a sustainable use to be found for it as well. I mean, that is next to nigh impossible in some instances. So I think that the City Walls and the ice factory will probably be coming off for next year. Last year's, as I said at the start, the 3 that came off, it just happened that the one was Edgar Tower. It just happened that the repairs to the 3 that came off were came to a conclusion at the same time. So I think this year is probably more typical of an annual heritage at risk register than last year's was. But those are my predictions. I probably set myself up to fall, but those are my predictions for that.
So we'll be able to celebrate next year?
I hope so. Yeah, I hope so. Yeah. Chairman?
I was going to say, are there any more questions? Otherwise, are we prepared to adopt the report as presented?
There is a recommendation, Chairman, that the committee note the contents and approve it for publication.
Yeah. Are we happy with that recommendation? Those in favour?
It's unanimous.
Unanimous. Thank you very much. Unless anyone has any other business? Right. Unless anyone has. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you very much, officers. Long day, so thank you.